So I'm your host for this session, Martin Giese. I have prepared some content to explain a little bit about UnternehmerTUM as our big player in the startup and innovation world in UnternehmerTUM, to give some examples of startups that I would claim belong into the creative field and world, and some about mainly success factors for startups, how to survive and how to prosper in this world. So let me maybe elaborate a little bit about myself and against which background I'm reporting here. So I'm originally studied law and journalism and then had a chance to go to the United States for 3 years to get dual master degrees out of Harvard and MIT. Harvard was the Kennedy School of Government with also a lot of negotiation content, and the MBA at MIT Sloan was very entrepreneurial. I returned to Germany, did some consulting and then a longer management career, in the end being managing director for a large call center operation at Vodafone Cable Deutschland. Left that 3 years ago to fully focus on the startup world. And I now have the honor to lead a Munich-based incubator for early stage startups. I'm actually a traveling coach, so I teach and coach and mentor in various leading programs and executive MBAs across Europe. I recently published my first book on startup financing. I'm currently working on my second one on B2B sales for startups. And I'm also an active business angel. So I have invested my own money in about a dozen companies, from IoT sensors, optimizing hospital processes. IRA actually is the future of water guns. So a premium water gun. Primo Espresso was a chain of espresso bars in companies. So I'm employed by an organization called UnternehmerTUM. And that's a very special entity that has grown in Munich over the last 18 years. We are now more than 200 people trying to support businesses around innovation, around various topics. So, and if we look at our different fields, we have services that go very deeply into the university world. So we are an affiliated institute of the Technical University in Munich, and we reach more than 5,000 participants with extra lectures, extra business plan seminars, hackathons, boot camps, innovation schools, evaluation of business concepts. And that also brings us then very close at the point if real projects come into existence and startups come into existence. And we have various programs catered to those startups, including the incubator that I run and an accelerator that closely works with corporate partners, supporting them at their interaction with startups. We also have financing mechanisms, so we can give convertible debt and full-fledged equity investments into our startups. We have our own fund currently with 150 million, but that's only a fraction what our startup portfolio is able to raise. So the startups coming out of our cluster last year raised more than 1 billion in terms of venture capital, which against a German total pie of 6 million shows that we have currently a disproportionate share of German startups and of successful German startups coming out of our cluster. This ecosystem also has a lot of connections to corporate partners. So we do trainings for corporates, we do consulting projects, and we have topical communities. So we have a big AI community, we have a cluster around mobility, we have a cluster for the construction industry and others. So we try to also support existing industry in terms of their digitalization, in terms of their innovation projects. As I said, this has grown since 18 years. We ourselves consider ourselves entrepreneurial, and we have grown every year by 25%. Maybe this year with Corona was a little bit more challenging, so that may be a little lower in 2020, but we're trying to keep up the good momentum. Any questions on UnternehmerTUM before I go into some more details on some of the most interesting programs? So we have educational programs. So Tech Talents and Manage and More are programs that give scholarships or networking opportunity to students. Training, the Digital Product School is a very intriguing training program where teams work full-time on innovation projects, and about half the participants are actually provided from existing companies that take this as a training program for their people, and the rest are often graphical designers, UX designers, software engineers. So some people you might well classify as creative people that get kind of a stipend to participate in these projects and contribute to an entrepreneurial type project. And we also do support the executive MBA of TUM. Then we have startup programs, including my own XPRENEURS incubator that I'll go into more detail. We have innovation programs, funding programs, and high-tech workshops. So you may find our makerspace fascinating. That's a 1,500 square meter workshop where you have all kinds of machinery for any type of hardware-based project. So we have a full textile workshop. We have 3D printers, laser cutters, water cutters, electronic workshops, any wielding, whatever you may want to work on. And on the right-hand side, you see the Munich Urban Collab that I'll go into more detail on, but that's a new campus that we are building with more than 10,000 square meters to be opened in April 21, which is a joint project of the City of Munich and UnternehmerTUM. And it will not only host a lot of our UnternehmerTUM program, including my incubator, it will also host a lot of the innovation people from the City of Munich. And it's also open for third parties who can rent offices there and be part of the hopefully very vibrant community there. And it's actually in the very heart of what is called the Kreativ quarter, so the creative quarter of Munich, so Schwere Reiterstraße, Dachauer, a little north of the main central station in Munich. Then what does our incubator do? So we are a program designed for high-tech entrepreneurs, and we always look for startups in the field of smart city, urban mobility, space, medical technology, sustainability, food and agrotech, cybersecurity, smart enterprise, B2B soft and hardware. So it's as you may see, it's a very wide net. So what we of course look for are scalable business ideas, meaning it shouldn't be kind of like an agency or consultancy that mainly works on billable hours, but it should be more a setup that develops some form of a product that ideally you develop once, but then can sell many times, which is the economic lever for real startup success. We recruit our own cohort twice a year. We're currently open for applicants for our cohort that we'll support from March to May. And we also run side calls for specific sponsors, especially for European programs, Bavarian programs around specific topics, with urban mobility being the largest one. What do teams get? They actually get office space in our facilities. They get coaching from our core team. We look for very senior mentors that we send to the teams to support them. We have a series of workshops covering needs of early stage startups, from branding, marketing, sales, negotiations, financial management, legal stuff, finding investors, negotiating with investors, and a lot about validating your idea, how to do user research, how to develop your product. And we have a lot of good experts that provide this content to the startups. And I'm very proud to say it works. So based on our last census, which was a big survey among our past participants, we are currently at 146 startups that we incubated in the last 4 years. We see 88% still alive as a startup, which we consider a very good ratio, because we really take them early stage, often before their first customer relationship and before their first investment. So this survival rate is good. And for those that didn't survive as a corporate entity, from all we see, the people doing it survive well and do well in their next job and their next gig. So it's no permanent harm done if they are not continuing with this particular project. We can spot about 1,200 jobs that our teams have created so far, with the largest teams now somewhere around 60 to 80 people employed. We see our teams very successful in terms of fundraising. So we are approaching almost 200 million raised from those teams, from mainly business angels and venture capitalists. We have a very high ratio of the teams that actually can convince professional investors to give them real money, at about 70 million. And we already see about 80 million of revenue that you can attribute to our startups as a projection what they'll turn around this year. Any questions specifically on the incubator and the type of activity that we are doing in that context? So we are also very connected globally, because a lot of these activities involve networking both locally but also internationally. So we have friendly relationships with a lot of players in the global innovation system, especially of course in Europe, but also in the US, especially both coasts, and a lot of contacts in Asia, Singapore and China being the very relevant ones. And we also closely cooperate with some of these programs in specific projects. We are often considered, together with a technical university, to be the best cluster in terms of bringing innovation from the university and the various university labs into real businesses. But we are now trying to formalize this project. So we have a project which we call Venture Labs, and that's something which is currently our current focus. And the idea is to really provide all the services that a team from the lab that has a marketable innovation needs, in terms of, first of all, getting the idea that they could go from the lab into a startup, to give them resources to develop those plans and validate those ideas, and give them a helping hand along the way. So from a startup perspective, this is maybe a 2 to 3 year journey where we are setting up the resources and the programs to combine what the technical university can do, what we as UnternehmerTUM can do, and filling some of the gaps we don't yet cover perfectly to support teams along this journey, and we're currently aiming it to do this for 11 faculties or topical areas in terms of designing our processes. This is a more schematic chart, but it kind of shows you can't do startup work in a vacuum. You basically, a lot of what we're doing here is community work in terms of always combining various players in the ecosystem. And if you look for this from the startups, they may often have some roots in the universities or some connections. They typically all need money, because if you want to do a scalable business, you often have to pre-finance some form of R&D or development before you are market ready. They typically all need some larger entities to join in, often as clients, especially our Munich startups. Many of them are more B2B than end customer focused. And governments play also a very big role. So it's very encouraging that we have significant support. And many of our teams get the Exist scholarship for investments. Many of our business angel deals are sweetened by the Invest program of the German government, or currently by the various COVID and Corona aid programs. And also for some of our most intriguing companies, they get also the full Exist research grants, which are often $1 million and more per startup to work on their project. And there's also a second layer of EU support money that goes via a mechanism called EIT, which is the European Institute of Technology. And my understanding is that the EIT is also planning something dedicated to the creative industries in terms of developing an innovation community and developing potentially also startup programs. Given your specific interest into creative industries, that's something you should probably keep an eye on, because this can be a quite powerful source of funding for these types of activities. I actually get the bulk of my funding for my incubator out of these type of EU programs. Where do we do this? I already said we are building the Munich Urban Collab as a shared initiative. So this building is now there. I was there 10 days ago, and we're currently putting the interior into the building, and it's meant to be a hub in the city of Munich to connect the UnternehmerTUM, connect city representatives, third parties, like some of the EITs actually will move their headquarters in there. And we have a few remaining spots. If someone needs a Munich location for any type of your activity, please feel very invited to take a closer look at what we are doing there. I'm really looking forward to this, hopefully being a very vibrant location. And one of your requests was you wanted to talk about specific examples for startups in the creative industries. And I actually went through my network when preparing this talk and identified 6 that I'm kind of familiar with. 3 of them are actually investments of mine. So I'm trying not to share any interna, but kind of give you an idea of the type of startups that come into existence and that you might want to take a look if you're interested in this field. So one category I kind of classified is media startups. So people doing some kind of business model that may connect to the existing media world. So one entity started by a very strong female founder is Family Punk. So it's a content platform, a community around parenting. So you'll find a lot of curated content and a community that goes both into parents sharing experiences and supporting themselves, and experts providing content to these to this target group of parents. And of course, it follows somewhat standard media laws that if you have a curated, very specific community, you can get better advertising euros, and because you have a more specific target group. Kind of another startup supported by the Munich Media Lab, actually the story market. So that's kind of a market platform for journalistic work. And it's a platform that allows freelance journalists to find additional clients for their journalists. So this is another startup mechanism. You build a platform and hopefully you bring together buyers and sellers of some form of goods, and you reach the critical mass that you have enough traffic to keep it relevant for both sides of this transaction. So then second cluster is gaming startups. So as you may know, gaming is an incredible large market in terms of the revenue generated. On the left-hand side, that's actually an international startup based in San Francisco and Athens that I have been an investor for the last 3 years. And what it does is it brings a lot of the same skill set and analytics that you also use in terms of social media marketing into the gaming world. So it helps game developers that may have great skills in terms of developing a cool game and building a community to actually monetize what they did. So, and in many of these games, that really means you need to convince people to buy digital assets, which may be extra strengths for your character, a digital sword, and others. And there is a whole art to this process. So you need to ask people at the right frequency with the right offers at the right pricing. If your game is global, you need to find the right pricing in Indonesia, South Africa, Latin America in order to optimize your revenue. And they provide a whole toolkit around that. Other gaming startup also playing on this community element is Flint. So that kind of tries to participate in the strong emotional bond that players have for their online characters that they develop, to give them a chance to showcase their achievements and to connect on this layer even outside the game with the accounts that they contract to showcase their successes and to connect to other gamers. And then a third category that I encounter, and these are also both investments of mine, are startups that are active somewhere in the augmented reality, virtual reality space, because that's a big change that currently has media outlets and a lot of new opportunities. And that's a juncture of kind of software and high-tech startups, and of course the content world, because for any type of augmented reality or virtual reality, you of course need great content. So in-flight VR started with a focus on providing in-flight or in-bus entertainment for leading airlines or like Flixbus passengers. And actually do this with a virtual reality headset. They are now widening their scope, also giving the pandemic challenges to air travel and bus travel to help businesses with their augmented reality and virtual reality challenges, which can both be improving coachings and trainings with virtual reality elements, or showcasing products using augmented reality and virtual reality. And so that's in-flight VR. And VR Direct and other Munich-based startups, they are kind of the content management platform enabling a lot of virtual reality projects and allowing companies to showcase this. They digitized a lot of museums or databases of Süddeutsche Zeitung and others. You can have your virtual inspection of an apartment that you're considering to rent. So also a very interesting platform player in this market. So they don't do the content, they rather do the enablement of content and platforms in a standardized way. So last segment of my talk is success factors of startups. And this is kind of a checklist of things that if you have them, they will give you tailwind for whatever you do in a startup project. And of course, the flip side is if you don't have these, you may either work hard to add them along your project, or you may see a weakness that may need some attention of what you do. But so this is a table taken from my book in terms of what makes a startup attractive. So it starts, of course, always with the quality of idea. So if the idea itself is not original or interesting, you're probably wasting your time. For some startups, patent protection is important. If we go into the creative world, that may be more the licensing or whether you can copyright the ownership of whatever you produce. And of course, always, if I, as an investor or as an incubator, taking a team into our processes, I always look for validation from a customer point of view. So if, I mean, I see many ideas that sound very plausible and intuitive, but to check on my judgment, learning of, have you talked to clients? What did they say? How did they react? Did you get signatures? Did you get LOIs? Did you get orders? Are people already wiring you money? That's of course always reassuring when evaluating a startup. Then beyond the idea, if you have a prototype or some visual representation of your product that you can see, and this is something that for you creative people should be very natural. So if you make it attractive and visual pleasing, if you can actually produce it, if the technology is elegant, and last but not least, if it is suitable for mass manufacture. Because if we think about a startup as a business concept, the fact that you can produce it many times, which is somewhat easier with digital content, but if you have any type of hardware, you likely be asked to explain how you plan mass production and the logistics that goes with it. If, like many people, you will use China in some form of or other, you will have to explain how you protect your IP while leveraging China for your project. Then when we evaluate startups, we always look very much for the team, and that's the key positions are covered, and that's often some form of a product person for creative startups, probably someone also bringing the core creative skill and spark to this project. There must be sufficient technical skills visible to pull this off, but there must also typically be some form of a commercial person that makes sure revenue comes in, sales happens, proper accounting happens, and these types of things are taken care of. And it always helps if the team has distinguished itself somewhat in terms of previous activities, previous employers, awards, seniority, kind of proven success. So if this team has been successful, pieces of it or the team in its entirety with some challenges previously, that of course helps. It also helps if you have already found interesting mentors or investors, because if people that are credible and meaningful for your project have started to dedicate their time and allow you to put their face into your pitch deck, then that also gives credibility to your team and helps to build trust. Any comments or questions on this?
I think I have a question that fits
Yes, please.
into this. So we've heard a lot about cross-innovation these days, and I would like to ask, what are, in your opinion, the main advantages for cross-sectoral or cross-innovation startups, especially in creative industries, maybe?
I mean, a lot of innovation that we see brings together insights from various fields. So, I mean, you always have, if you want to have really disruptive change, I think it's often necessary to bring together pieces from two different elements. Like you have kind of medical research that goes in its process, and there's incremental improvement. But then maybe, for example, when you combine AI and medical, you suddenly have a total new lever. And then there were some ideas how this could go that thought AI could take totally away, for example, the evaluation of medical images from the doctors. And actually that didn't work either. I think now in the second or third generation of tackling this, we are getting to smart ways that really combine the AI and the doctors and plays to the particular strengths of what both bring to the picture. So I would actually be scared to give the evaluation totally to the AI, but where the AI seems to be better than every doctor is spotting irregularities that need someone to take a closer look. So you kind of take the image, then the AI marks specific points and maybe even enlarges them for the doctor to take a look. But then surprising, or maybe not surprisingly, it's still the doctor who can take the final call and kind of trigger the diagnosis out of that. So that's combining two areas. Then many good products that have a customer-facing type, of course, need typically a decent element of creative skills in terms of UX design, in terms of app design, in terms of user flow design, and other skills, which is probably where the creative skills also have a relevant contribution to startups that in themselves might not be considered to be in the creative areas. What potential do you see for non-technical innovation? I mean, there are businesses where it's really a technical innovation that is at the core, and that's very much my focus, where I feel the most comfortable. But then innovation can also be just in the business model. Like if you think about an Uber or an Airbnb, the act of people renting space to others, or of people giving other people a lift from one location to another, actually in itself, the underlying product is a commodity that has been around all the time. But then the delivery mechanism, the business model, that someone actually has a global database of apartments available to be rented between individuals, is the innovation, and then technology enables these steps. But that's what I'd say almost a business model innovation, and that can of course help. And I mean, most businesses need some form of a service or a product, and I'm not sure that every product needs to be deep tech and high tech in order to be relevant. Speaking of theaters, I have a brother and sister-in-law who are musicians. So of course they all now currently had a tough time because their usual concerts didn't happen. But they were able to do some kind of online concerts with either paying audiences or audiences invite to donate. So it was like, pay us as much as you like to pay for attending this content. So there is always adaptation. I think as currently so much is moving online, I have a hard time seeing innovation that totally operates without some piece of technology. But then again, a lot of entrepreneurship is combining complementary pieces. So it could be very well that you yourself don't have to be technical, but you might be an interesting piece complementing two other co-founders that may be more technical in nature to develop some form of a service. But I think in terms of kind of the type of startup that really aims to create a multi-million business and be scalable and replicable, technology often helps achieving that long-term goal of mass scale. And we have an example from Volodymyr. So it's food innovation. One Dutch startup I'm supporting, they are an impact startup. They take also in the food world, they take goods that don't fit the standard DIN norm and may not, but process them into muesli, and they produce from foods that otherwise would have been thrown away. Or so to impact, or a food startup producing actually sustainable forks and spoons that are edible, going into the world of providing plastic, but that still has a quite elaborate production process for an edible spoon out of the shells of cocoa beans. So there is work to do. Let me maybe finish the second part of this list about success factors and then open it up for a final round of discussion. So when looking at the chances for a startup, of course, any type of revenue is reassuring, and especially recurring revenues. So investors love everything that looks like a subscription and kind of proves this month revenue will return next month. Strategic partners are very important if you get them on board. I personally pay a lot of attention to the financial plan because I'm a numbers guy. And for me, apart from a nice PowerPoint chart deck explaining the story, I want to also see the story in kind of an Excel format, and ideally the same story consistent with a PowerPoint deck. Typically helps if you have a large market, because that improves your margin for error. If there's only a limited number of potential customers, you have less of a buffer in terms of whom you win. And of course, the market needs to be dynamic again. So people often very much underestimate the latency of customers switching to someone else. So especially B2B sales processes are somewhat painful and often take much longer than anyone can perceive to really get a decision, and after the decision to really start the rollout and get revenue to come in. There's always a look to the competition. So no competition would be kind of scary, because that means you may be the only one seeing this opportunity and may harm your credibility. At the same time, you should be able to explain how you are different or ahead of your competition in having found a smarter or better angle at the problem. And last point is investors always also are excited about exit potential. So we want to understand at which point we get our money back. And typically, we are not looking for dividends to get it back over 30, 40, 50 years. We have some form of an exit, which means a sale to a larger entity, going public, or somewhat that then accelerates us getting our money back. And that's something that's less intuitive for founders that may want to do this project 30 or 40 years. But as a business angel, it's more a 10, 12-year journey, which is already long, but I want to have at least a logical idea who could buy your business. And that's kind of my list of success factors. So when you build a business, you may put this aside and see how many boxes you can check. And if you find some points you have and don't talk about, you probably should put them into your pitch, promoting your business. But maybe a round of discussion, and maybe if you have projects on your own that you are working on, I would be very intrigued to hear about them. Can you elaborate on the different value dimensions that are at play when you decide on whether or not concepts are investable? I mean, it's always a trade-off between potential rewards and the risk that you take on. And kind of the reward is always kind of how profitable is one unit of this business, and giving kind of market size and market share and a reasonable sales process, how big can this go? And that's kind of on one side of the balance. And on the other side, it's a trade-off against risk. And the risk in this stage is often kind of the product risk. Will people buy it? Which is why you look at initial feedback from clients or target clients. It's often a dimension of team risk. So you really spend time with the team to understand how they operate and whether they can, you're really confident that they can pull it off. There's this question of market risk. What is the market dynamics? What is the competition? And then for the technological startups, it's also a question of technological risk. So does this work? Does the prototype work? Does the water gun shoot water in an impressive way as they promised it would? And these are the boxes that you tick on the other end. But one point that's also important, as like an investor, I look at hundreds of plans to occasionally invest. So it's not that I have proven that the other 99 will not work, but it's kind of something needs to really excite me, that I think this is kind of an outlier, that I feel I get a good deal in terms of the economics. But it also, typically there needs to be some kind of emotional involvement to the topic in the team, because a lot of things may cross my radar. I may see them at a pitch event and think, hey, yeah, this is plausible, but I may just never follow up, just in terms of my limited resources of time. So apart from the 1 in 100 I invest, there's probably another 19 where I say, yeah, probably it works, and someone may be a happy investor in this one, but I don't find the time to follow up. But I think we have to come to an end, because you have the next program I need to learn. I think there is a link for you on a Mentimeter to put in some feedback that Laszlo put in, but I'd like to wish you a great rest of this conference.